Joining us on Newsmakers on this Sunday, Congressman Kevin Brady. He is the Vice Chair of the Joint Economic Committee, a member of the House Ways and Means Committee as we talk about taxes, the economy, health care, and presidential politics. And joining us here for the questioning is John Farrell, congressional correspondent for the National Journal, and Richard Rubin of Bloomberg News with the first question.
Congressman, President Obama this week made his case for extending almost all of the tax cuts that are scheduled to expire at the end of the year. He said, look, Republicans agree that we should extend tax cuts for 98% of people. You want 100? He'd prefer to extend for 98. He says, let's just do what we agree on and then fight about what we disagree on later. What's wrong with that approach?
You know, I think it creates far more uncertainty for the economy. And as you know, we have a struggling economy. Here we are 3 years after the recession ended. We actually have the worst recovery, 10th of 10, since World War II. This will create more uncertainty in frankly, an arena we don't need that. Secondly, it doesn't solve the problem, and I guess that's the key point. It doesn't solve the economic problem. It won't be good for the economy to fight over this or not extend it. Secondly, it isn't serious about deficit reduction. The truth is, at these spending levels, we could double everyone's taxes in America. Washington would still be running a deficit, and as we know, the President's already signed into law about $670 billion of tax increases already. Not a dime went to deficit reduction. So I really think we ought to agree on extending these cuts, or at least stopping the tax increases, and making a serious commitment, a guaranteed up or down vote on fundamental tax reform next year, so we can discuss not only how we create a pro-growth tax code, how do we really sustain our entitlements, and how do we get, again, healthcare costs, I think, truly under control.
But how does it reduce uncertainty if you take 98% of the uncertainty off the table?
Well, because those who will be punished on the President's proposal are A, small business owners, B, those who are most likely to contribute to economic growth. And frankly, we might be able to find one economist who thinks it's good for the economy to raise those taxes, but we would wear out a car trying to find a second. I just think it's the wrong solution.
John Farrell.
Yeah, but how do you go home to Houston and talk to people and say, who really know how the economy works because they're sitting down at the table writing out the bills on Sunday night, and say that, well, you know, we have to give a tax break to those big oil billionaires living down in Houston because eventually they may hire a secretarial assistant that your daughter may be lucky enough to get that job, and then the alternative is that the Democrats want to give them a Pell Grant so their daughter can go to school. How do you convince those people there that your way for this, we're only talking about this very top 2%, is the right way to go?
Texas sort of gets it already in their voters. Because we think a good low tax climate. We have a very balanced regulatory climate. We have a very entrepreneurial type culture. We're one of 3 states have made back all the jobs since the recession, are adding on to it. And most of our constituents are puzzled, why doesn't Washington do the same? Why doesn't it create a competitive lower cost tax code? Why doesn't it get its financial house in order? Why doesn't it just balance its regulations more? And so for us, in an economy that actually is growing and expanding, they get it.
We were talking about Texas. Do you support Governor Perry's decision not to go for the Medicaid funding?
This is the governor's decision, and working with the legislature, they clearly are very concerned about some estimated $24 billion of extra costs. As you know, every state, whether your economy is doing well or not, has really got an eye toward the bottom line, and I think he's very concerned about that going forward.
Yeah, but how do you support it? I'm sorry.
I was going to ask you how constituents in Texas may feel if that money is going to Arkansas, to Louisiana, and not to your state.
You know, I think there's actually been an evolution at the state level. You know, for so long, the federal government sort of provided a teaser rate, you know, on all these dollars. Do this and we'll pay most of it. But as we know, that eventually goes away. And so, you know, they're not so easily attracted to that initial funding because at the end of the day, they normally pick up the bill.
You want to follow up?
Yeah, just, do you support Governor Perry's decision?
I support the state making their decision. And clearly,
okay.
No, but
he has made his decision. Do you agree with it?
At the federal level, I think it was a mistake the way ObamaCare was designed. I don't think it really tackles the problem at all. And so for states to look at those mandates and those opportunities to make decisions, you know, I think he's making a good decision.
Okay, so when you go home and the county commissioner walks in and says, holy cow, I got, another 3,000 people who don't have health care, and you're turning down this money from Washington, you're going to say, well, that's the price of freedom?
My county commissioners believe that Obamacare will make it tougher. And as you know, in Texas, we really struggle to cover. We have a very poor population.
Yeah.
In the border state, we have those who are here illegally. So it's a challenge already. But in our analysis, overall, the president's health care law is going to make it tougher, we think, to cover our citizens.
Richard Rubin.
When you talk about the healthcare law, the House voted this week to repeal the law, just like you did back in January of 2011. That's likely not going anywhere in the Senate. Republicans have talked a lot about repeal and replace. Where's the second half of that been, and what is the Republican prescription for dealing with healthcare?
I think we can look to the bill that was produced by Ways and Means, but was never given a vote on the House floor by the Speaker. That was the only one that was certified to actually lower healthcare premiums by about 10%. They took a step-by-step approach and basically focused on how do we lower the cost of healthcare with, one, allowing small businesses to join together to get the discounts the big boys get, the ability for citizens and businesses to shop across the country, across state lines, by the best plan available to them. It had lawsuit reform to drive out those extra costs, and it did deal with allowing younger people to stay on their parents' plans longer. It did deal with pre-existing illnesses, but more through the state plans rather than at the federal level. And so it was a good start. And I do think that we ought to look at creating, in effect, a worker backpack, where a person can choose a health care plan anywhere in America that's tailored to their needs, that they can take with them from job to job, state to state, at home while they're raising their family, when they're starting a small business, one that they really have a tie to. And I think if we create some new ideas for a society that doesn't stay in the same job, frankly, 40 years, as has been done in the past, I think we can both lower the cost of care and improve the quality of it.
But the individual that had the framework for the Affordable Care Act is going to be your party's nominee. Does that take away an issue for you? Because many of the Democrats are going to say, wait a minute, you led the way.
I don't think so. Back home, at least in our state, people understand that Governor Romney was acting in Massachusetts, trying to design a solution for Massachusetts. And he's made it very clear he doesn't think that's the right solution for the rest of the country. So I firmly believe that with the new president, not only are we going to see that health care plan reversed, we're going to have a serious discussion about real affordable health care reform.
But if so much of what you just said, this Republican platform that you like, is in Obamacare, and you take away the mandate, and there seems to be that there's an awful lot that you and President Romney or President Obama could agree on next year with momentum going forward. So why are you guys so insistent on 34 votes or whatever it was about repealing this evil Obamacare?
Well, we had 2 votes on the full repeal, one as a law and one as amended by the Supreme Court, which is very reasonable.
I fell into the Democratic rhetoric.
Well,
okay.
no, but we did have a number of votes to fund certain parts of it, so you're correct there. We don't, in the Republican plans, any of them, we don't have 21 significant tax increases, many of them which hit the middle class. We don't see the government run exchanges, the cuts on Medicare. We don't see those provisions as being integral to lowering health care costs. We do think there needs to be serious discussion about, rather than having to hire more IRS agents of any amount to enforce this law, we ought to be, adding thousands of new doctors, new nurses, and infrastructure that actually takes care of people as well. So I would not characterize us as having common ground on the mandate or the 159 agencies, the bureaucracy that surrounds Obamacare. We just think that's the wrong solution.
Well, you've talked a lot about lowering costs, improving quality. What you haven't talked much about is expanding access to insurance, right? So one of the things that the president's law did was expand access to, for insurance of 30 million people. So those taxes you talked about pay for subsidies in the form of refundable tax credits to buy insurance. What do you think how important is it that, is that goal of increasing the number of people who are insured, and what would Republicans do about that?
I think it's very important. And it's not just offering them health care insurance, but actually offering them health care coverage. As we know, half of all the new enrollees under the president's health care plan is in Medicaid. It's getting tougher and tougher to find a doctor, who will actually see someone on Medicaid. We think that the coverage of most of that was by government paying the extra cost of health care rather than a serious effort to actually lower costs. I come from a local Chamber of Commerce perspective, so healthcare is big. Small businesses really struggle to afford it. It's the cost. And that's where I think he failed to address the key element, except for while we have money, we're going to try to pay down that cost instead of going to the core of it, which is how do we remove the costs? How do we create a lot more competition and choice in healthcare? Such a big part of our market, but you and I don't really have big choices in healthcare among plans, among coverage. We certainly can't take it with us for most of our life. It isn't our behavior as patients isn't reflected in our healthcare, frankly, costs at all. So I think I give the president credit for taking on healthcare as a reform issue. I think the solution was absolutely wrong.
Let me ask you about something you said earlier about adding certainty to the tax code, because in an interview for this network, David Axelrod said that if the president is reelected, he thinks that Republicans next year would cross the aisle and work on a number of issues, including the tax code. So if the president is reelected, do you think that the Republicans will work with him in a bipartisan way that we haven't seen really in the last 3.5 years?
We've been at the table now for a year and a half on fundamental tax reform, waiting for the president to sit down and stay at the table with us. Ways and Means Committee, we've held, I think, 20 separate hearings on tax reform. We've actually made public a draft on international reform and invited the president to come sit down with us. In a few weeks, you'll see a bill coming out of the House that not only extends the current tax levels to make sure we stop the tax hike, but also outlines both our principles and a timetable next year for a guaranteed up or down vote on tax reform. In effect, forcing Congress and whoever is the president to do their job. So absolutely, we're going to be at the table and we're going to stay at it.
Will the atmosphere be different next year?
It's hard to know. I really think how we all wake up on Wednesday, November 7th will shape very much the dynamics for both at the end of the year this year and going forward as well. I just, all spin aside, I just think the American public is hungry for truth tellers. Tell us how deep a problem Social Security is, and the idea is to solve them. Tell us the problems with Medicare, how we do it in tax reform. I think they're hungry for us in the new president or whoever's in the office to be bold about those solutions.
Yeah. Let me get a quick question in. What's the target date that you're talking about?
2013.
Just any time next
year?
End of next year, okay.
Yeah, and I really think you need time for both parties and the president to lay out their ideas. But as you know, tax code is fairly complex. Writing the transition rules, as you know, to make it, sound and reasonable and fit takes some time too. So I think having the time for the ideas, the time for the discussion, then actually write a thoughtful law that people understand is going to take that time.
So the thinking is right now for the lame duck session is to put together some sort of bill that everybody can agree on to put the big decisions off for enough time for you guys to get down, sit down, and work this out.
I
shouldn't say all the big decisions, but you still have a debt extension limit.
Goal,
you still have a sequester for the Defense Department. So what exactly? How does this all fit together in that immense crush of time between November and December 31st?
I think it's a mistake to leave all those issues to the lame duck. I think that's why the House is going to move at least, the bill to stop those tax increases and set up that guaranteed up or down vote on tax reform. That's why we're going to do it. We're not interested in putting off the tough decisions. But I also, just looking at the debt ceiling, look at those other issues, haven't seen the White House nimble enough to come up with those solutions in that short timetable.
When you talk about truth-telling and tough decisions, among the toughest decisions you'll have in tax reform is how you broaden the tax base. So Republicans have talked a lot about we're going to lower the rates, and there's a $5 trillion hole in the plan that Republicans haven't said how you'd fill it. So how would you fill it? What tax breaks would get shrunken, eliminated, curtailed to make that happen?
At the end of the day, if we're serious about getting our business taxes down to 25% or less, if we want to do the same for families, individuals, 25 and 15% levels, then we can't continue all the tax expenditures. Now, not all of them will go, but not all of them can stay. That's why, and it won't be easy. I think that's why in the past, for 20-some years or more, Congress has not dealt with it. But I think the time is up, and to do it, you're going to need real partners at the table, the House, the Senate, and the President. So I'm absolutely convinced, Richard, it can be done, and it can be done next year.
John Farrell.
Yeah, did you read that Tax Policy Center report this
did.
week? That made it sound like it can't be done.
See, I read it differently. My initial thought was no new news here. Everyone knows it's going to be difficult.
Tough, so.
You're going to have to reduce between 1/3 and 2/3 of the current tax expenditures. My gut was, yeah, that's probably in the ballpark.
Yeah, so
Well, that report indicated, among other things, possibly eliminating the interest deduction on mortgages, which is a huge item for most Americans.
You know, I think that whole list of tax expenditures is a bit stunning. You know, when you see it, a lot of it's been created around a tax code that isn't low and isn't fair, you know, and is very complex. So I think if you focus on getting down to a real pro-growth tax code, frankly, a number of those expenditures aren't needed. I'm not saying which ones are, but that's why we have a process to do it.
Richard Rubin of Bloomberg.
If you talk about those tax expenditures, how do you consider things like the earned income tax credit and the tax breaks that are really targeted at people on the lower end of the income scale?
You know, I think all of that has to fit into a pro-growth tax discussion. And I think, you know, we often look at how progressive it is. We often look at how it's all distributed. But I think the greatest inequality is between an American who does have a job and one who doesn't have a job. If we create the right tax code to put us back into a competitive standpoint, I think we're going to put a lot more people to work. And frankly, fairness is going to increase dramatically.
Will the goal be just to do that, to make a fair tax code, or are you going to try to squeeze a few extra $100 million for deficit reduction as well?
You know, I think if we do it right, we're going to generate, through a stronger economy, more revenue. Great example. I don't think we put the energy workers back to work, both in the Gulf and onshore, as we should. I think we leave about $60 to $80 billion on the table over a decade in those jobs. I think there's a way to both grow the economy and generate new revenues while we're doing it. Republicans very open the idea of new revenues through economic growth.
You said something earlier about big problems: Social Security, Medicare, the deficit, taxes.
Yeah.
We've seen the numbers, but from your vantage point, how big are the problems?
They're massive. And I say this because 2 weeks ago, sitting in a small room in the basement of Rayburn, we heard from the trustees of the Social Security system. Essentially what they said, and this got almost no coverage, was Social Security has never been in as bad a shape financially as it is today. The deterioration of the last year is the greatest deterioration since 1994. And they essentially said time is running out on this program. And Social Security is actually the easiest of the entitlements to resolve. Medicare is going to be a challenge. Medicaid, I think there's a good path forward there with some bipartisan support, working with our governors. So yeah, these are serious problems. And on the business environment in America, we are missing a huge opportunity. Right now, we know what's happening in Europe. We know the growth is slowing in China. With the right business environment and the right economy, we could be a magnet for investment and growth around the world. But we're stumbling around with, I think, bad policies on the economy. Regulations move way past, I think, the pale. And again, these healthcare costs are a drag.
Yeah. All right. So, given all the scale and the scope of that problem, you guys still came back to the floor this week, and talked about, or we talked about tax cuts in which only 3% of those people in that upper tax break are actually going to be creating jobs. So you're going to be giving a whole lot of money away to people who really don't need it. 97% of them don't. I mean, it's fun to have money. It's fun to be rich. We all want to be rich. But as far as like turning this economy around, paying down the debt, doing things like Medicare, reinforcing the Social Security Trust Fund, instead you decided that what you need to do is give more money to millionaires and billionaires. This is the Democratic argument, and it's a lot of people in the polls buy it.
I wish people would read the rest of that sentence in that joint tax letter, because they do say 3.5% of taxpayers will be hit with this. But that's almost 1 million small businesses in America, almost half of all small business income. So you're actually hitting the job creators along Main Street you most want to encourage, and so again, bad for the economy. And if you look at those in those rates, for example, some have said, let's tax people that are millionaires or above. Well, most of those are business owners, 4 out of 5. The number one business they're in is American manufacturing. So again, I don't think it's a real serious proposal, at least the president's, in Democrats in Congress, that get the economy going, really pay down the deficit, create some growth.
We have about 5 minutes remaining. Richard Rubin.
Well, when you talk about those trying to get bipartisan solutions to those big problems, what Democrats say is their response is, look, we're willing to meet you part of the way there, but Republicans have to give a little bit on revenue, that there has to be some meeting in the middle. Is there any way other than the dynamic scoring growth argument where Republicans would be willing to give some revenue in exchange for some spending cuts?
Tax increases, no. Revenue from economic growth, yes. We think we've got a serious spending problem that has to be addressed first. We also think if you grow the economy, you have the revenues, both to tackle the deficit and start paying down the national debt. And so, yeah, I think the common ground is a stronger economy through, I think, spending discipline, better economic policies, balanced regulation will generate the growth we think America wants.
John Farrell of National Journal.
Yeah, you're an expert on international trade and the way money moves around the world, and Governor Romney has run into some problems this week trying to explain his Swiss bank account and his Cayman Island investments. Do those issues bother people in Texas?
I don't think so. And I'll say this, I think with the economy so poor, struggling right now, 3 years after recession ended, and I would predict that on Election Day, there will be fewer Americans working than the day President Obama took office. Think about that. After the bailout, the stimulus, the housing bailout, auto bailout, cash for clunkers, cash for caulkers. For a while, they were paying us to buy new appliances. $5 trillion in debt. This president will actually have taken the country backwards in jobs. That's the issue most voters will go into that booth thinking about.
Do you think that Governor Romney should put out more than that 1 year of tax returns?
You know, his call, I think it's right now, all of that's a distraction. People, frankly, aren't paying attention to it. I don't care if you're in a battleground state or not. They see that as politics. The question is my community growing? Is my family more secure? Do we, are we underwater in our home? Do we have a secure job? So.
But it is an issue that voters understand as the Democrats try to frame this as a choice election.
I guess I don't agree there. I really do think those key issues on the economy, on jobs, on debt, and health care will drive 99% of the voters.
Final question.
Well, as you talk about bipartisanship, how would you sort of gauge how Congress has changed on that front since you've been here, and how capable is this Congress or the next Congress going to be of working across party lines?
We get asked this question back home. We do a lot of town halls. We'll get asked this question. Is it really as bitter and partisan up there as we're led to believe? And my answer is no. In fact, it's been more bitter, and I think it's been more partisan in other years. What we have right now is a significantly different view of which direction the country ought to go. Significantly different solutions on those key problems. It really is more principle and ideology than it is just partisan, I think, interests there. So at the end of the day, I actually think we can solve some of these problems. And voters who have made some real significant change decisions the last 4 to 6 years really are going to, at the end of the day, make the decision, what are those solutions? Do they think the problem is we spend too much or that we don't take enough of people's income? They're going to make a decision about how big a government can they afford, or do they want to pay for it? And frankly, they're going to make a decision on, do they want the president's health care law to be the law of the land?
You're a 16-year veteran, though, of the House. You've worked with Democratic and Republican presidents. So who do you blame? Do you blame this president? Is he any different than a George W. Bush or a Bill Clinton?
You know, I think as far as partisanship, I would say this president, other than trade issues where we've had an opportunity successfully to work with him, I just don't think he's led. I don't think he's on the key issues, not only led, but has sat down with us to solve the problems, at least in the last year and a half.
Congressman Kevin Brady, a Republican of Texas, the vice chair of the Joint Economic Committee and a member of the House Ways and Means. Thanks very much for joining us here on C-SPAN.
Appreciate it.
We continue the conversation with John Farrell of National